am so pleased to welcome you today to the Ingenious You community.
Hey, Melissa, thank you so much. Happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Now, you have the unique distinction of being one of only a handful, maybe just a few, that may be overstating it even, college presidents who hold a medical degree. Can you tell us what the backstory is for your leadership journey? How does somebody with an MD wind up in the college presidency?
Yeah, thank you. A long story medium. I am a proud first generation Nigerian American, and our people, the Igbos, we instill education in the cradle, in the crib, right? So education was always important to me, and education in multiple areas, that would be engineering, medicine, you name it. And from a very young age, I wanted to be a physician. My late uncle, who died in the Nigerian Civil War, and my parents survived. He was a physician and died tragically. So it was something like the family trait. My younger brother is also a physician. So never had a doubt from a young age what I wanted to do. And I was proud to earn my medical doctorate from St. Matthew's University School of Medicine, and started to work and kind of figure out what specialty or subspecialties I wanted to get into. And then life happens, like with all of us, where my wife and I were expecting our first child, and we had experienced some health challenges during that time. And I made a decision that I did not want to be an absentee father, not on 100 hours a week. I wanted to be present, available, and there for my wife and our son. So I took a break, and most physicians, or at least most physicians of my generation, we don't really know anything else. So I had to ask myself really quickly, what am I going to do during this quote unquote break that was meant to be temporary? And I told myself, well, I've lived in the science lab for God knows a decade plus between undergrad and med school and training. So I said, I guess I can teach science courses. So at that time, we lived in the greater metro Atlanta area, and I taught as an adjunct for some local colleges. And I crashed and burned, right? I did not do well because I simply thought you could just walk into the classroom and regurgitate information. But I was surrounded by great leaders and educators and mentors who saw something in me in terms of my a knack for complexities, and they put their shoulder around me and really began to introduce the principles of pedagogy and student learning outcomes, programmatic learning outcomes, institutional learning outcomes. And I got that taste. I got that taste in terms of being able to instill knowledge in individuals, but connected to where students are wanting to go. And from there, it went from, okay, I can influence and impact a classroom environment. What about a department environment? So one rainy Friday, though it's Thursday, raining like today, I believe I was the only person on campus, and I was voluntold to be a department chair, not knowing what that was, but I got the taste. I got the taste in terms of organizations, complexities, collaboration, communication, and I really applied what I learned in medicine, which is do no harm, make it about the patient, and treat the entire body, right? Be holistic in that approach. And I literally just applied that to education in terms of making it about the student, right? It's about the entire institution, not just a classroom, if it's going to thrive. And I never looked back, right? I never looked back. So that was kind of like the moment and the reason, but definitely not planned. Definitely not planned. Definitely by chance. But I'm really grateful and appreciative of everyone who's done so much to get me to this point.
What a great foundation for
Yeah.
senior leadership work to have been in the classroom, to have struggled as a faculty member. I've had that experience. My first online courses, I'm fond of saying, were the worst courses I've ever taught, because you have to sometimes be pretty humble to figure these things out. But also the do no harm. Boy, what a great mantra for a leader, particularly going into something that you've gone into here. So the do no harm when it comes to students, when it comes to the campus community. But you were hired here in Connecticut to do what some might call an impossible job. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you stepped into a really big, a very complicated job in overseeing the merger of Connecticut's 12 community colleges into one system. Now, anybody who lives in Connecticut knows that we're a unique state, right? You can't be in Hartford and assume you know what it's like to be in New Haven or to be in Naugatuck or so if you think about where the community colleges are located, and they're all very individualistic. So for you to come in and be charged with putting into motion this plan to merge these institutions into one in a state where the culture may not necessarily be in sync with that. And also, I think it's fair to say, there have been mergers in the private space, but not so much in the public space. So there was no playbook, right, for you to take off the shelf and say, okay, this is how to do it. So for our listeners, particularly those outside of Connecticut, what's the background for this merger? I know it took what, 7 years?
At least.
At
At
least.
least, yeah.
It wasn't necessarily embraced by everybody, right? A lot of dissension. So
Yes.
how did the merger come about? What was the goal? And how did you approach it as the new person on the ground?
Yeah, yeah. Let me unpack that. So for starters, what I tell people here in Connecticut, I tell people outside of Connecticut, the merger of Connecticut's 12 legacy community colleges, probably the most complicated process in the history of higher education, right? Just in terms of its magnitude. There have been other mergers, but definitely smaller, in scale, and it faced a lot of resistance. So, this formally came about 7 or 8 years ago under a different administration, both at our CSCU, Connecticut State College and University system, but also at the state level during former Governor Malloy's administration in terms of the merger idea. And under that leadership, a proposal was submitted. Now, again, the merger of the CSCU, its creation was only a couple of years, right? So the Connecticut State Universities, the fourth, then Charter Oak State College, and the 12 and the community college system, they were merged into a higher ed system, I believe back in 2011. So, and that was also complicated and faced a lot of resistance. So, you had this dynamic. It faced immediate resistance from a litany of groups, from the unions, from faculty to staff, to the current community college presidents at that time, to community members, to some legislators. So you name it. And there were various models along the way in terms of, is this going to be regional? Is it simply just going to be 3 community colleges? And ultimately, in 2017, the then system president submitted, a proposal to the Board of Regents, and in terms of the official ask uh, um, of not only merging the community colleges, but really kind of focusing on merging and consolidating back office, non-people or student-facing operations in the hopes to save money. I want to say some of the projections were nearly 40 or $41 million of savings without reductions of faculty or staff. And it was driven by significant enrollment decline. It was driven by complexities going between the community colleges. And those were conditions there. Now, what drove those decisions were the facts that backed up those decisions. I can't speak to that, but ultimately, per my research, that was there. But it failed, right? All these different models that were proposed to the institutional accreditor, who is NETCHE, New England Commission on Higher Education, that accredits the majority of institutions of higher education in New England, rejected so many of the various proposals until March of 22. So March of 2022, NETCHE, the accreditor, approved and gave the green light for the system to officially and formally move forward with consolidating the 12 community colleges. And then 2 months later, I began my tenure as the inaugural president. and had that year to ultimately land that plane. So that in a nutshell is how we got here. Some of the detail behind the reasons behind merging, that in itself is still debated in terms of the why, in terms of the projections. But ultimately we're here.
So how did you approach this? So you came in from Minnesota. You were working in the Minnesota Community College system, right?
Yeah.
And so what was in your mind as you came into this and you thought, okay, I've got 1 year to land the plane? How did you, as a leader, how did you approach it?
Well, for starters, though there were the original plans and design, um, and though I was told how the state would benefit and the things that were working, um, it wasn't difficult to see and discover the level of resistance, some cases animosity, but just really tension and emotion as it pertained to this. And I had to delineate that. I had to one just talk to people who were from here that had no ties to the system or the 12 colleges. Talk to leaders and professionals who were no longer in Connecticut but knew the backstory of how we got here, and the different iterations um, of this model. And then ultimately, I knew that at the end of the day, if I'm simply a leader in name, if I simply buy into the ivory tower approach where I'm just going to sit in this office, I had this office since I started, and sit behind a desk and really make it about my first year, and going around the state shaking hands and kissing babies, but not really connecting with the people, then it was going to be impossible, like you mentioned earlier. I think next, I realized quickly that Connecticut um, was still um, in the throes of not lockdown, but social distancing, and extremely everything was done remotely.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that hit me because in Minnesota, I was a vice president of academic student affairs for a community college that was a part of the Minnesota State Colleges and University system. So a much bigger version of the system I'm in. We moved back face to face fall of 20, though limited, not full scale. There was a joint agreement between labor and unions and administration that we can't deliver all of our services and our instruction entirely remote. So we had a phased approach in terms of, I believe it was 25%, and we would scale up by 10%. And then within a year to 18 months, we were back to about 85% in person. So in Minnesota, we went through those challenges of going from entirely remote to now in person, and dealing with that social awkwardness, dealing with the stress, the concern about your health, but also the concern about your students, and
Right.
trying to deliver education services in a way that's productive for them. So when I came here, I'm like, oh, wow, you guys have been social distancing and telecommuting for the entire time since the start of the pandemic. So you have that on top of the merger. So I felt that it was the people piece. It was a human element, and that led me to embark on this statewide 100-day listening tour where I wanted to engage with as many people as possible to hear firsthand, first and foremost, how are our people doing?
Mm.
Just on a human level, how are you doing with all of this? And through your lens, not my lens. Two, tell me what's been going on. Tell me your concerns about the merger. Tell me things you don't understand. Tell me things that have been frustrating. And then line what I was hearing versus what I was told or what I read on a piece of paper. It's saying that, okay, there's a huge delta. And if I don't close this gap, if I don't make significant changes on the front end, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to pull this off. Not just the approval of being merged, but that what leader am I if I look behind me and everyone is gone?
Mm.
Because I forced this on individuals and I wasn't willing to meet people where they are. So I felt like that was an opportunity immediately at the start of my presidency that if I'm going to make an impact and turn down the temperature and make this about people, I have to not be robotic. I really have to be authentic and intentional and present and aware and accept how people are feeling, what they've gone through, not just the merger, the pending merger, not just the pandemic, but this 7 to 8 year movement where there's an unknown. People are feeling like their colleges are being taken away from them. And I had to be cognizant of that. And if I wasn't, then I'm more of the same, right? I'm a suit. I'm an administrator that just has tunnel vision versus this role is about servitude. This role is about serving all faculty,
So,
all students, all staff, regardless if they support you or not. That's the gig, that's the role.
mm, so from all of the listening, what emerged as the most significant takeaway for you in terms of what you heard? Because you mentioned the Delta, so obviously you were hearing some things that were not necessarily consistent with what was uh, underway. And then what changes did you make? I mean, it sounds like you may have pivoted in terms of your approach based on what you heard from people.
Yeah, so the first thing that stood out, and again, I don't want to cast aspersions and question intentionality or motive,
Mhm.
but it was easy for me to see. And also, I have a lot of colleagues that trust that have worked in New England for a very long time. And I've been a part of systems and institutions where the things that have been successful were inclusive and collaborative through the spirit of shared governance. The things that were contentious and failed were things that were decided and pushed by a select few. And I realized quickly that the majority of folks that I engage with, per their words and their lived experiences, they're on the outside looking in. And they felt that it was top-down decision making. They weren't in the room, they weren't at the table when it came to the specifics of the design of how this is going to be, its rollout, its implementation, from the merger of the programs to the level of services. Um, when I took over, when I became president, it was heavily centralized where you're talking about 90%, 95% of all employees were reporting up to New Britain, which is the home of our central office. And all of the campus leaders were only responsible or had provision or side of maybe 5 to 10% of the people on their campuses. So the majority of employees were not seeing their quote unquote supervisors every day. Decisions were coming from one central location. And you mentioned something earlier. You said something earlier that is in the fabric of Connecticut, right? That goes back to the year 1600. That just because you are in Hartford does not mean that the dynamics are the same in terms of what's taking place in New Haven, Waterbury, Norwalk, Bridgeport, Killingly, Torrington, on and on and on. And our campuses mirrored the local community. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. We can't take a cookie cutter approach to this. Connecticut's too complicated. The colleges are too complicated. But people felt like, again, this was a plan by somebody else. So, and you mentioned the structure. It was a regional structure. So I was president. Then there were 3 regional presidents. They had a handful of campuses reporting to them. So it was very convoluted. And the campus leaders did not report to me directly. So there were a lot of things that I had to change. I think one, I got rid of the regional structure. I got rid of the regional structure. And I got rid of the 3 regional president model. It just something that was not conducive to a one college. Going from 12 to 1 was difficult enough, but now you have this 12, 3, 1. The math didn't make any sense. Effective July 1 of last year, all 12 campus CEOs reporting up to me because now they're on my cabinet. You are my leadership. You're my brain trust. I'm looking to you to better understand the nuances and dynamics across our campuses.
Yeah.
Earlier in the fall, we pushed to decentralize CT State, where reporting lines went back to the campuses. So those are some of the changes that were made. In addition to, there were some inconsistencies with public safety. Student mental health was really challenging. So we had to invest in mental health. But ultimately, there weren't platforms for people to speak freely without fear of, I'm speaking out of turn and I'm publicly being labeled an opponent to the merger. I'm like, you're not obligated to agree with me or agree with this, but I need you at the table to help me right this ship. And let's begin to write our own story in terms of what this college could be for the people of Connecticut.
Mm, good for you that you were willing to listen and change course on some things. The structure you've just described from a common sense perspective and knowing Connecticut and the higher ed system here makes all the sense in the world to me. So, kudos to you, because leaders don't always do that. Sometimes leaders dig in, as you know, and
Yeah.
just keep going. So it takes courage to step back and say, oh, okay, we need to rethink this. So I think that's one of many things, I want to highlight in terms of how you've approached this. Where are you at in the change process now? So you know, with change, there's the disruption at the beginning. Where would you describe where you are right now in the change process?
We are in the early stages. We are 9 months old,
Yeah.
right? We're one of the newest institutions of higher education in America. And with that comes its own set of challenges. Like, we're in early stages, right? This will be a multi-year process. The mantra that I coined at the end of my 100-day tour, and then I produced a 100-day report. The mantra was stabilize, build, and thrive. Like, you don't get more chaotic than us in the face of everything and anything. And we first have to stabilize before we can start thriving. We have to stabilize. So we're in this stabilization and building phase, right? Where we're literally formulating the building blocks of an institution. Our governance structure is still very new, both at the state level, and then there's some reconfiguring at some of our campuses in terms of local governance and how do they work together, right? Though we merged all of our curriculum into one catalog, there's some challenges where there needs to be some refining of some of the programs and make sure they work for our students. Many of our systems are brand new. So our student information system, how we communicate, how we record, how we manage the data to do the work for this institution, is brand new. And also we're facing a significant structural and fiscal deficit, right? And now we're working with our system and the legislature, governor's office for a path forward, right? So we were absolutely in those early stages. And often I have to remind people that, like, we're going to be hurting for some time because of just how new, but also how just complex this is in terms of we've never done this before. So
Yeah.
understandably, there are going to be things that, we did not think about that. We didn't get eggs, we didn't get duct tape, we didn't get some prayer beads. Okay, we need to add that to our shopping cart to help us kind of usher this new college forward.
Well, and there's nobody else that's done it either, right? I mean, I'm not aware of it, at this level in the public space, community college mergers. I'm not aware of anybody that's done something this complex, resulting in an entity as big as you are, 70,000 students, right?
Not in a very long time. You have Ivy Tech, and Ivy Tech is Indiana's community college, but they've been that for such a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it went through this. And there's been mergers of smaller colleges. A college that came from Minnesota was a result of a merger, but it was, basically two institutions and multiple campuses. But to your point, to this degree, yeah, right. So it's difficult to call someone,
Right.
right? Because I think even a county-wide college or a citywide college is very different than a statewide institution.
Right. Well, and even you can't pick up the phone and call Netchi, I would imagine, because Netchi, you're new to Netchi. Your structure is even new to your regional accrediting body, which not to say you can't call them, they're wonderful, they're very
Yeah,
helpful, but this is new for them too. So it's new ground for everybody, which makes it even more complicated and but fun, I guess, in some ways. You strike me as somebody that likes the challenge of of something like this.
it's the ultimate case study in higher education,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
I think that's where the intellectual and innovative juices are flowing in terms of how do we make this thing work? You know, in terms of Netche's great. Their president Larry Shaw, their vice president Pat
yeah,
O'Brien, sister Pat, they're great, and I can call them and just pick their brain, and they'll remind me, John, you have one of the more complicated institutions in New England. But you know, we're prepping for our formal site visit evaluation with Netche a year from now. And Netche has even told me, yeah, we've never done this before in terms of an institution like you. So they're still working on the logistics of how big of a team are they going to send to Connecticut a year from now to really do this statewide comprehensive assessment.
yeah, yeah. Oh boy, this is a case study. It's got to be written up at some point. So, now you've mentioned establishing a new normal of higher ed in the wake of the pandemic's impact. And some listeners may not know that the Connecticut Community College system lost a significant share of enrollment during the pandemic in particular. I think, was it 15%?
Yeah, 15, 20%. I think 1 year alone, we had lost 20,000 students.
Yeah, which is a lot. I mean, that's
Yeah.
so well, first of all, how are you doing now with enrollment? Have you, I think I have read that you've rebounded
Yeah.
from that low point. But can you share more about how you are adapting to the new normal and what changes you think will be permanent in the higher ed landscape?
Yeah, you know, enrollment wise, we've experienced flat enrollment year over year, and we'll take it. That to me, that's stabilizing enrollment, and we've stopped the building.
Yeah,
What I remind people, I remind our legislature, I remind our stakeholders, second only to Arizona, Connecticut suffered the second most community college enrollment loss in the country. So it was significant here. And it's not in a vacuum, right? I really believe it's correlated with the challenges that we're seeing here in Connecticut. We have a significant amount of disconnected youth that we're seeing across the state, right? We're having a housing crisis, childcare crisis, an affordability crisis in the state of Connecticut. And because we serve all the communities in the state of Connecticut, our students are feeling that, and we see that where someone has to choose between life and education. In terms of the new normal, you know, I think higher education, or not higher education, I believe the pandemic, you know, I think it exacerbated the issues that were already there for our students and for many of the communities that we serve. That was one. I think obviously we had to rush to online, but I think it's forced us to recognize that online is here to stay. And you know, we're still trying to get back the people we lost. And that means that we have to deliver our education and services differently. We have to meet our students where they are. We have to recognize and be aware that if you don't have the support system, right? If you don't have the resources in terms of getting to class, staying enrolled, having housing, having food, having childcare, having mental health, it's very difficult to learn, very difficult to stay enrolled, very difficult to be a college student. It's Connecticut, have it be you're a community college or a university, right? And we have to recognize those visible and invisible barriers and bundle our services, bundle our care, bundle our wraparound supports on the front end before we even start to engage a student in the learning environment. And I think last but not least, you know, higher ed as a sector is on fire. It's
yeah,
not just CT State, this new merged community college. We're seeing it across our country in terms of there's just stress, right? The federal COVID relief dollars are drying up, right? For community colleges, I believe either one or two out of all community colleges, out of 10 community colleges, have rebounded, right? The majority of community colleges are still struggling with trying to right size enrollment and their finances. And then last but not least, we've seen a tremendous amount of turnover in the higher ed sector. for a litany of reasons, from anti-DEI practices in different parts of our country. I think just the pandemic, people were burnt out and tired and never recovered and just kind of just walked away. And we're dealing with that, right? We're dealing with that right now, and we have to accept it. And if we don't and think that what worked and what were our strategies pre-March of 2020, that they're going to be as effective today, like you're dead wrong, right? And that's I think higher ed struggles because we are a perpetual sector. We're deep in tradition. We're deep in, we've always done it this way, right? We'll bounce back. And we're not seeing that right now. And we have to adapt. We have to pivot, or we're going to continue to be in this very tense, tough place.
Well, I want to go a little deeper in terms of the topic of student success, because you're known for your commitment to student success reformation and equitable postgraduate outcomes. And in some ways, you mentioned that you've got a lot of new systems there that you're putting in place. In some ways, I would think that gives you an advantage because it has enabled you to rethink your approach to serving students on any number of fronts. So can you talk a little bit more about any innovative practices that have been introduced or are in the process of being introduced in terms of student success? And I know there's another equity by design methodology is something that you are a fan of. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so let me merge both of those things. So I'm a huge proponent of equity by design, right? And when people ask me to describe Connecticut Community College, aka CT State, I start with this. I tell people that we are a mission-driven, student-centered, equity-minded, data-informed, comprehensive community college, right? That's who we are at our core. And equity-minded and data-informed are really important. So equity by design is first and foremost that you have to be centered in data as well in terms of understanding who you serve. And often when systems or institutions take the aggregate assumptions or summaries or breakdown of whomever, whatever, it does not tell the complete story, right? So when you disaggregate the data, so my definition of equity is accepting that there are inequities that exist in systems and in our institutions and organizations. And in order to identify those inequities, you have to disaggregate the data, right? And comparing, underserved groups with the average or with the group that's doing the best, and say, okay, there's an equity gap or an opportunity gap between our African American and Hispanic or Latin students with our white students, or low income students compared to our non-low income or non-Pell students. Why is there a gap, right? And then begin to drill down even further in terms of is it how we communicate, is it how we market, is it how we deliver, and what are the quote unquote lived experiences and circumstances of where these students are coming from that maybe presents the challenges that they're not succeeding, matriculating, or being retained at a certain rate. That's really important, right? From there, you begin to kind of craft and design and plan interventions and systems to support that. So case in point, we have a guided pathways advisor model where we've reduced our student to advisor ratio, where it used to be in the 700s, and now it's down hovering in the 250 to 1, making it more manageable, where each guided pathways advisor has a caseload. They know their individual students. They can track their progress. There are check-ins and certain activities and actions on the part of the student to ensure that they have the momentum to persist and move forward. We've invested in mental health because now we're surveying our students more frequently and asking them about not only their experience, but also their challenges. And 40% of our students have told us, especially since the height of the pandemic, that mental health is a big challenge. So we invested in licensed mental health counselors across our 12 main campuses. Affordability is another barrier, and we benefit and we're appreciative to the significant investment of the General Assembly and Governor Lamont in our free tuition pack program, where 52% of our students attend CT State paying $0 in tuition and fees, right? And now we're seeing that those students with the advising, with the mental health support, benefiting from the PAC program, their graduation rates are up, their retention is up, their student success metrics are up. And that's a big deal because we've identified those barriers and we've made it about the student versus making the student adapt to us. We're adapting to our students and we continue to learn more and more about them. And again, those challenges and behaviors that we have to help them overcome while also connecting the academic and the co-curricular dots so they can be successful ultimately.
Yeah, I'm hearing your medical training and your science background coming into play here, because the interventions you're talking about are evidence-based, they're data-driven. I'm a big advocate for the guided pathways model. Some of the data that are being reported in terms of the efficacy of that approach is really
Yes.
quite stunning. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so good for you. Now, Governor Lamont has expressed a lot of confidence in your leadership for improving workforce opportunities for Connecticut residents. So, how are you aligning programs with the evolving needs of the local and national workforce? And what else can you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Governor Lamont's support, but I also appreciate our Chancellor Terrence Chang and his leadership and support of me, of our college. And, he's doing those battles and engagement at the legislative and executive levels on the behalf of CT State and all of our institutions. From a workforce standpoint, Connecticut State Community College, we're the largest provider of workforce development training and offerings in the state of Connecticut, hands down. We're second to no one. We enroll nearly 4,000 nursing and health profession students a year. We enroll 1,400 manufacturing students a year. We're the largest manufacturing training provider in Connecticut, hands down. We enroll about 2,500 IT students a year. And those are the three main areas of shortages that have been identified per Governor Lamont's Workforce Council. We work with all 5 regional workforce boards, the Office of Workforce Strategies, all of the major Connecticut state agencies, along with our school districts, municipalities, chambers, and et cetera. So it is an ecosystem. And it's not about us doing everything. It's us leveraging what we do well, but also connecting with our colleagues and partners at the state level and locally and tapping into what they do well for the needs of our employers. We're engaged a lot more often with our employers to really understand their needs in terms of what they're seeing, have it be soft skills or have it be the specific competencies that they feel that we need to incorporate in our academic offerings and our trainings, but we're also educating our employers about the challenges that our students are facing, where an employer might ask, CT State, your graduates are not coming into our place of business. And through our analysis, we will share with them, well, students, the wages you're providing, a student can work at these companies without any education. So why would they go to you? Or your job is in Hartford, but they live in another part of Connecticut, and transportation becomes a real factor, right? Or childcare. So it's a two-way street, and that's been helpful. We know we have historic levels of workforce shortages, and we're doing everything we can in our power to work with everyone to do that. But it's really empowering to know that we do so much statewide. We touch the majority of sectors. We touch the majority of communities. That's the hope. That's the hope I lean on in terms of, despite our challenges as a new college in this environment, in this setting, we still made these impacts that are both generational but also transformational.
Well, and that was your segue to I was going to ask you about challenges and opportunities and what you see as the greatest opportunity. And that indeed, that kind of impact is beyond significant. Is there anything else that you would say in terms of either thinking about CT State challenges, opportunities, or as the leader of this new entity, the biggest challenges, opportunities, and how are you going to know? Do you have your own internal benchmark for knowing when you are where you want to be? Or is this something that's just going to keep moving? Is it the end goal keeps moving?
I think the angle or the goalpost when it's moved without our involvement makes it very challenging. I think for me, when I look to our employees, they're seeking and they're urging a sense of stability, knowing what's going to happen, knowing what our structure is going to be, and if our new systems are working in the way that are conducive to their success. So that's something that we have to continue to work on. Have it be it's professional development, have it be it's not just communication, but when we're working on something that it is a collaborative experience where we have multiple stakeholders involved in terms of the developing of what we need to do. From a student standpoint, my goal for students goes beyond graduation and retention and even gainful employment. At the end of the day, I start with our graduates have secured a family sustaining career so they can thrive. And what's the definition of thriving in Connecticut? Not in Arkansas and other states, in Connecticut. We know that's challenging. But at the end of the day, if our students are going to thrive, right, we have to do right by them. So looking at how we deliver, how we offer, making sure that our instruction, but also our programs are relevant and tangible to the opportunities here in the state to give our students a leg up, right, to do well, to support their families, support their communities. I think from a challenge standpoint, just looking at the data, the Dalio Foundation has done studies about disconnected youth. Governor Lamont's administration, they did a study, I think recently, and it stated that Connecticut's one of the most segregated states in the country. So often people tell me there are two Connecticut's, right, from a financial and from a social economic standpoint, and our students come from that, right? I live in the America. I live in the same America that our students live in terms of you think about your finances, you think about your family, you think about your livelihood, you think about your retirement, and how you're going to make sense of that day in and day out, right? And I think that's the challenge right now. The challenge is connecting the various systems in a state that loves its independence. Hey, it's a constitution state. So, the individual municipalities, I get it and I respect it. And I'm not trying to change that. But how do we weave a thread across these areas for the greater good? I believe education. I believe, education. If you think about, a rising tide lifts all boats, and education is that rising tide. And I really believe that CT State Community College, unlike anyone else, because we don't turn people away. We don't say no to any students. We accept you, right? We don't filter out, we filter in, right? And we're proud of that it's never too late. And we don't look at your zip code, we don't look at your background. We look at those things to identify who you are and respect it and acknowledge it and understand it. But we don't use it against you, right? Because to me, it's your superpower, it's your asset. It's connecting those dots. So it's that challenge is making it work in Connecticut and making it work despite what's going on. But we have to have that hope, right? If we're not doing this work, then who else is when it comes to the people of this great state? And that's what gets me up in the morning, to know that we have the opportunity to change lives, but also to impact communities, to scale. And that's something that's empowering. It's challenging, it can be scary, but I'm really confident and proud of the people I get to serve and what they do. I get to brag about our faculty and our staff and our leaders. I get to stand on their shoulders, but I also get to fight for them. And I really love to fight for their ideas, but also their needs and also their visions. Like that's the role of the president. It has to be like that's the role of the president, at least through my lens, at least through my 2 years of experience in this role.
So what advice would you then give to emerging leaders in higher education? I'm thinking some of the students who enroll in our doctoral program in ed leadership at Bay Path. These are people that really want to make significant change. They're people like we were talking about Antonio Santiago, and shout out to him. Your dean out at
Dr. Santiago.
Dr.
Yeah,
Santiago, yes. And he
yes.
listens to the
Yeah.
podcast. So
Yeah.
And he went for his doctorate because he is so passionate about wanting to change, to make a change in higher education. So what would be your advice to our students, to other emerging leaders who are embarking on a similar path to you?
Yeah, I gave a talk recently last week. We have a leadership academy, and we also have a center of teaching and learning, and
Yeah.
they do great work. So I had an opportunity to speak in front of them, and the other guest speaker kind of coined what I was speaking to in a way that I'm just going to steal from him and use it. But basically, it's the plumbing PVCs of leadership, right? And it's called PVC, which is people, it's vision and culture. And before I get to that, I think for aspiring leaders, I start off with like why are you getting into leadership, right? And it really starts there. And if you can't answer that question, I don't know what to tell you because I learned that in med school. When I was applying in med schools, you get the question, you get the interview. Why you want to become a doctor? If your answer is I want to help people, oh yeah, they laugh you out of the room. They're like, no, be honest. So why do you want to be a doctor? I'm a type A personality. I like complex systems, right? I'm good with my hands. I'm whatever that is. So I think the why, and there is no wrong answer. There is no right answer. I think it's for that individual. But going back to the PVCs, I think it's people. I think if you're going to do this work, you have to make it about the people you serve, right? And understanding their needs. It's students, it's faculty, it's staff and community members. It's also vision, right? I think I don't care what system you're going into, you have to have a vision, and people have to know your vision, right? So you have to set the vision, right? You have to verify that vision. You have to repeat the vision. If people don't know what the vision is, like a random person on the campus, you ask them, what's the vision of the institution? They don't know what it is. You, as the leader, haven't done a good enough job repeating the vision to all stakeholders. And then lastly, it's culture, right? The culture of an organization is people knowing that you inherently care about them, that I care about you, I care about your well being and your success. That applies to students and that applies to employees, right? But also to the culture and ecosystem that we're trying to create so all of us can exist. And that in this ecosystem, I feel like I belong. Like that's really important versus I'm just a number or I don't have a title, so therefore my opinions, my ideas don't matter. As a leader, you're managing those things constantly. Have to be as a faculty, a department chair, a student affairs director, a middle manager, a dean, a vice president, or even an institutional leader. Like those things are constant, and you have to manage and balance that. And like that's my advice. If at your core you don't know why you're getting into leadership, I'm not sure this is for you. I don't think you're a bad person, but you have to be able to answer that question for yourself. If so, everything falls in place. And I know we're running out of time. The last thing a piece of advice I would mention is don't chase wins.
Mm.
Like so often I've heard people like they're chasing wins. They're wanting to just stack these wins for the sake of stacking these wins versus are you stacking success for the people you serve, right? Right. If you do that, whatever accolades you're seeking, they'll come. But ultimately, are you making this about the people you serve? Like that is so important, right? At the end of the day, people want to be seen and heard. And it doesn't matter how credentialed you are. Within 5 minutes, people know what you're about. Are you about yourself? And accolades, or are you about, hey, I got to roll up my sleeves and get into the trenches and be willing to hear the truth and ask people, please tell me what's wrong. Help me understand. If there's a hole in the wall, please show me the hole in the wall or the ceiling. That's so important. It sounds simple, but I think often when we're seeing conflict in organizations, that's at the root cause because there's a mismatch or there's a poor order of priorities. So the priority is the people and the mission and the causes that we're tasked with supporting. So that's a mouthful. That's my advice for anyone seeking leadership in higher education. That has to be at the core of what's driving you.
Yeah, very wise. So that says it all. So we have two questions here to finish
Yeah.
with. One is you've talked about being a family man. You talked about stopping out of medical school because of the family situation.
I graduated from it. I became a physician and I graduated.
Yes,
I didn't
okay.
stop out of med school.
Thank you for
Yeah, just
thank you for correcting
yeah.
me on
Let me make
that.
that let me make that clear. I earned my
You
credentials
earned your
as
credential.
yeah,
But
and worked as that. Yep.
so family and a personal life is important to you. How do you keep your saw sharpened So how do you stay resilient and do that balancing act with family and this job that is incredibly big and complicated?
Yeah, I'm nothing without my beautiful wife and my kids. So that's an absolutely easy decision. I'm a community college president. It's what I do. It's not who I am.
Yeah.
I'm a husband. I'm a father, and my wife and I are proud autism parents.
Mm.
And autism, in terms of what my children have faced, but also their breakthroughs and their intelligence and their ability to thrive, has really taught me how to learn differently, for me to understand people differently, to get out of this cookie cutter approach and making it about the individual, and also to slow down, right? Also slow down and understand people and listen to people and notice things more. And that's all due to our children. And we learn more from them than they learn from us. So that grounds me, right? That grounds me in terms of their safety and their wellness, and their happiness. That's easy. So like when I'm home, or when it's time to take time off to be with them, it's a very easy decision for me to do. And I'm not good at what I do without them, right? So they center me, they ground me, and if I'm not doing right by them, then nothing else matters.
Yeah. Signature question. We ask this of every guest who comes on the show. If you could leave one transformative idea or piece of advice that would shape the future of higher ed, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think from a higher ed standpoint, we are struggling within a very, I know when we say archaic, it sounds insulting, but in many ways we are still doing the same things that we've done decades ago, on how we fund it, right? How we structure our academic year, how we deliver education, how we work with K-12, how we handle the challenges with university transfer, how we work with industry, and how we work with local and state and federal governments, right? And we're coming to a tipping point in higher education, and it's up to all of us. It's up to all of us to really put our arms around this and ask ourselves: are we really structuring higher education the way it needs to be, not for even today, but for the next 20 to 50 years? And that's scary. But if we don't take that challenge, someone's going to do it for us. And I think we're seeing that in certain states where it's being dictated to higher education. So we really have to get off the sidelines and really look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves: is it structured for the needs of our students, or structured per our preferences? Right? And that's not an easy question to answer. But that's, to me, that's what we have to address.
Yeah, it's a good litmus test for the
Yeah.
work that we're doing. So, John, thank you so, so very much. This has been such a pleasure and great to hear firsthand your story and how the work is going there. So good luck to you in the months ahead.
And Melissa, thank you so much for your support. I'm an avid listener as well, and you provide a platform, for our sector, for our professionals, for our leaders. It's really it's therapeutic for me, but ultimately it helps us tell our story and better connect, with community and other colleagues, across our sector. So thank you so much for what you do for all of us.